you have been prepared for a few topics for this discussion, and the rest of the time we will put approximately 50-50 to the discussion between you and also questions and answers from everybody in the room. So the first topic I'd like to start out, since you have covered more than 40 years of research here in the field, what is the, of all things that happened during this time, what is the most important development, you think? Would you like to start, Paul?
It's hard to single out one evolving string of findings, and of course we've learned a lot gradually in this research. But I think one result is that you can study these attitudes and perceptions scientifically, just like you can study scientifically the physical, chemical properties of matter that are related to the production, say, of nuclear energy. We're talking about processes in the mind and the reaction of the human mind to information. And I remember I participated, the Department of Energy initiated a few years ago a program of research on effects of very small exposures to radiation. And they were able to, because the technology permits now stimulating a single cell with a radioactive particle and then watching the response of that cell, a very exquisite form of modern research on the effects of radiation. And I thought, well, this is kind of what we do as well. We stimulate the human mind with information and look to the response. It's really very much the same thing. And I think that's what risk perception research has done, is to show that you can study this, you can quantify it, you can look at differences between people and you know, cultural differences, national differences of the kind that we described today, and you know, to a certain extent make some sense of it and understand why people react the way they do and why their reactions are sometimes different from the reactions that experts have. So to me, I think that's kind of one general result of this work.
Well, I think when I look back on the development research in this field and my own work, which started back in the 70s, from the beginning I'm a psychologist, just as you are, Paul, and for me it was natural to look at this in a sort of individualistic perspective. How do individuals perceive risk? And I thought of it as a cognitive phenomenon, a sort of information processing phenomenon. And then gradually I have come to realize or believe, you can choose which word you prefer there, that emotions and affect play a major role. But then beyond that, I also come to believe that this has to be seen in a social context. It's not enough to just have an individualistic perspective, and that people are affected in their social environment, but that their risk beliefs are based also on what other people around them believe and tell them. We get so much of our beliefs and opinions from the social environment that I call social validation. I think that's very important. And so I think the social perspective is interesting and should be, I think, more in the focus of attention in the future.
Okay, that was an interesting, both interesting answers showing the ability to quantify individual reactions is one of the basic factors for the success, let's say, of the risk perception paradigm developing from the start here, especially in the 70s. And then as you say, Lennart, the importance of how other people react and the difference between, well, what I think, depending on what I think others think. So would you say this has been more obvious for us during this time, or is it, what is the explanation? Certainly, it wasn't different in the early 70s, the influence of what others thought and media, for example. But today we are much more in the larger social picture when we are discussing risk research than we were in the 70s. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, of course, there's been a lot of dramatic risk events over the last decade. Risk has always been with us, but it seems that it's getting a lot more attention, and maybe the magnitude of these consequences are greater. We can kind of discuss why is that? Why there seems to be greater vulnerability to risk from nature and from technology than in the past, and that's a whole issue that we may or may not want to get into, which I think has sensitized us to things. But in terms of the social aspects, I can only speak really for the United States, where we find tremendous resistance to change. We have strong controversies about behaviors that have some scientific basis, or one can approach them from a factual knowledge, like climate change, for example, or gun control or other things. And what the work by Dan Kahan has shown, which I much too briefly reviewed, documents what Leonard said about the importance of social factors and the notion that we are part of a group. We relate to different segments of society, our friends, the kind of people we identify with, and our reaction to hazards and other things is very much conditioned by being a member of this group and responding in a way that the group will respond and will reinforce us for responding. And that's a very worrisome trend, and I don't know if it's worse than it used to be. It seems to me that it's worse. So, for example, we can't get anywhere in the U.S. in discussing climate change issues, and we see that the Republicans don't believe that climate change is caused by people and that we should even study it any further. It says this is just natural fluctuation. Forget about it. Don't change your behavior. And Democrats think very much the opposite. Well, why should Democrat, Republican? And there's a whole scientific world that is collecting information about climate, a massive amount that is basically just going over the, people are ignoring it, or they filter the information. They attend to information that reinforces their beliefs. If the information threatens their belief or their identity, they find ways to disregard it. And this is, again, the part of the social environment that is coloring reaction to what is technical information. So I find that very worrisome, and I don't know where it's going to lead. And I put in my slide the references to several recent articles, in Nature and Scientific American and other places, if you want to see more about this, because it's really becoming recognized and documented through studies like Kahan has done, how resistant people are to information. And so where is that going to lead, and how do we overcome that? That's the challenge. So these references I put in, I think, are very enlightening and very disturbing in that regard.
Can I add something there? I think the internet makes it even worse, because the internet makes your social environment worldwide somehow, and you can find, if you have some strange ideas, you can quickly find other people who have similar strange ideas, who will support and validate your notions and make you even less likely to ever change them. And there will be, groups are being formed, networks are being formed on the internet. I think I don't know if there is any research on risk perception and networking on the internet, but I think if there hasn't been, it should be an interesting topic, I think, for future work.
So the next question actually goes into cognition and emotions, and you have already said that we are seemingly going into an emotional state, where to a higher extent than before, and that I would say quite disturbing if we are not looking into facts and information that is available, but base our life on beliefs, and especially beliefs from people surrounding us, instead of having some kind of independent action or independent thinking with respect to the facts that are presented by science, etc. So the question was actually formulated like this, so let's start again and see if we can come up with good explanations. Quite a lot of research in the field of risk perception has focused on the contribution of various cognitive and emotional aspects of perception of risk. How do you explain the relationships between thinking and feeling? You have both already mentioned it, but
when you say explain the relationships, what do you mean by the word explain?
a little bit what comes first, or what are the strongest influences, and how does it develop?
Well, I think this is an area that is very much currently under study. I don't think we really know the answer to that question. We know that we think in different ways, that we have a fast, intuitive response to information, but we also are able to deliberate very carefully and thoughtfully and analytically about information and bring reasons. I mean, the language of science, or the methods of science, the method of law, where you take evidence and you reason about it and come to conclusions. We can do that. It's just that it's hard. It takes effort and time, and it's much easier to go with our gut feelings. So evolution has enabled us to, as part of our brain is designed for fast reactions, and it's easier, it's more natural to do that. So now we have these two ways of thinking, which are active simultaneously in the brain, in what you might call the dance of affect and reason. And people are trying to understand that, and it's very complex. And I don't think we have the full explanation. But one of the so for example, one way in which these reactions differ is the reaction to consequences that are very large in scale. So something that we value a human life very highly, single life. We do a lot to preserve individual lives. But then we hear about threats to large numbers of people, and we kind of, if we react instinctively and quickly, the numbers bounce off us. We don't feel the meaning of those numbers, and we are not moved to respond to large-scale problems, whether it's an environment or violence or famine or disease or things that happen that are statistical. Whereas if we stepped away from that and thought about, well, logically, the importance of what we're seeing in the large scale, we might be moved to react very strongly. But if we just go with our gut feelings, we will underreact. So it's just one aspect of how the different ways of thinking lead to different responses. And there's a lot of research going on now that's trying to understand the interplay between emotion and reason. And the work by Damasio that I mentioned briefly argued that you need both ways of thinking to be rational. And he studies people with lesions to the prefrontal cortex, which don't impair their ability to think logically about issues, but impair their ability to have feelings about the anticipated outcomes of actions. And they can't make good decisions. They know that if they shoot a gun at someone, that person will fall over dead. They don't feel that that's bad to do or something. So you need both the feelings and reasons, and we're still trying to learn more about how they interact.
Can I add, I think an interesting question related to this issue is the amount of information that you get. Because it's an old research has shown that if you get more information, you become more confident about your judgments. But in reality, you can only handle so much information in an efficient way. There is an optimal point which is fairly low, and if you get information beyond that, you will make worse judgments, believing that you make better judgments. I think again, the internet and the information technology makes this problem even worse, and that will make people live sort of in an illusory world where they think they make very wise judgments and assessments because they have so much information, while the opposite is true.
Yes, thank you very much. So we are getting at some information society affecting us, that we are both more confident in what we believe and more strongly believing those things. The overconfidence bias, so to speak, can possibly be discerned here in the development of all the information we have about risks and all other kinds of information, maybe. So how do you see the future? What is going to be the future concerns of the next generation? Will they be overconfident and just go for gut feelings in all respects, or will they be meticulous when to use all the factual information we have, or will there be other social movements steering the next, or will people care at all? I suppose we should include.
A very interesting and a difficult question. So I have a hope that is based on the research that's being done now. As we understand more about the role of emotions and feelings versus what we might call factual or intellectual scientific knowledge, and we see the way that people are using this information, and say we find that there are systematic biases in the way we react that are very difficult to overcome through knowledge. And we can tell people, okay, beware. We find that people like you are overconfident in your ability to control your risk from smoking or whatever it is, and so you tell people about the bias and say, be careful, don't do that. But a lot of times we still, they're so natural to behave this way that we will behave this way. So then the challenge is, can we then apply some sort of information and process engineering to say, okay, people are going to do that. How can we structure the environment to either to force them or to think more deeply, or to coerce them to think more deeply? And I think that's the direction that hopefully will come out of better knowledge. So, for example, I'm studying this the failure of intuition to react to large-scale consequences. I think that's leads to non-rational behavior, and I think that I think it's going to be very difficult. That's the way we're wired. Our brains don't react to. You say that 600,000 people might die of some cause. It's just a number, so we don't react. And I think we have to create laws and institutions that, in our moments of reflection, when we think analytically about the size of some events, we say we can't allow that to happen. If we come to a societal, agreement that really a civilized society shouldn't behave this way, then how do we structure laws and institutions that are sensitive to the psychological biases that we all have? So, for example, and just another turn of this is just thinking about the tax system in many of our countries. So we could leave it to our moral intuitions about how much we should pay every year in income tax to the state, for that we could talk about all the benefits, where the good things that this money will do, and then say, you're a moral citizen, pay what you think is right. Okay, but we don't do that. We know that there are forces that will lead people to kind of underpay or pay, we wouldn't get enough. So then we create laws backed by the force of law to and formulae to how much we should pay. So we don't leave it to intuition. I think we may have, we have to think about that with regard to other large-scale environmental or social, political consequences where our gut feelings are going to mislead us. And I argue that our gut feelings mislead us when the scale of the consequences are large at a distance, in geographic distance, or a distance in time. We tend to underestimate that, and we need to then create mechanisms that will not let us turn away from these kind of consequences.
I agree with Paul, and I would like to add just another aspect, and that is the sort of structural economic aspect. Can rich people afford to be irrational? And do poor people have to be rational? I think that is the case to even a large extent. If you are poor, you have to be rational to survive. If you're rich, you can afford to be irrational, I think. And if you look at this at sort of societal level, it seems to me that the problems of the world are getting worse and worse. We have the climate change problems and number of other problems, which will make it more and more necessary to be rational in order to survive. I think we can, just for a limited time, afford being irrational in the rich Western world, and that time, I think, will come to an end.
I hope the audience has a lot of good responses to these questions, and also new questions. Who would like to